Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you. Thank you all so much for being here this evening. Now, really quick, who has been to this campus before? Who has been to the Margaret Mitchell? Oh, well, welcome back to everyone who's back for the first time in a couple of years. To everyone who hasn't been here before, welcome. You are sitting in a building called Commercial Row. It is a 1920s residential building restored here. We use it as an event space. We have some tenants on the other side of the wall as well, Savvy, and a couple of restaurants. So this campus is Atlanta History Center Midtown. We are gearing up for reopening in the coming year. So we're really excited to share more with you about that very, very soon. But in the meantime, just keep an eye on our website. We'll have some announcements related to the Margaret Mitchell House, specifically a new exhibit that's coming we're very excited about. And then we'll start having more events down here as well. But welcome, everyone. I'm Claire Haley. I'm Vice President for Special Projects of Atlanta History Center. These are some of my favorite events to get to do because to connect with readers and connect with incredible authors is always just a treat and a pleasure. And y'all are in for a really wonderful conversation this evening. So first, I see many of you have this beautiful, wonderful book in your hands. Sorry, it's very heavy. It is 50 Years of Myths, the best of the pathfinding magazine that ignited a revolution. How many Myth subscribers do we have in the room here tonight? Yeah, that's what I thought. So thank you so much for doing that. And also, there's so much in here to explore. If you don't yet have your copy of the book, they are available for sale over against the wall. We highly encourage you to get one for yourself, get one for your friend, get one for those members of your family who could maybe use a little bit of reading of this over the holidays. That's all I'm going to say. And we're joined by a wonderful panel of contributors tonight. I'm just going to introduce Ms. Kathy Spiller, who's the executive editor of Ms., and then she will introduce all of our other wonderful panelists this evening. Kathy Spiller, she's, like I said, the executive editor of Ms. She's the editor and contributor to 50 Years of Myths, the book that many of you have in your hands or will soon have in your hands. Under her oversight, Ms. has increased its investigative reporting and in-depth analysis. Today is the largest print and online feminist platform, which is incredible. It reaches millions across the globe via the quarterly print magazine, the wonderful website. It's beautiful, a robust daily and weekly e-newsletter mailing list, social media, and digital textbook resources. She is also the executive director of Feminist Majority Foundation and Feminist Majority National Organizations working for women's equality, empowerment, and nonviolence, one of the founders. She has been a driving force in executing that organization's diverse programs since 1987. So you have an expert guiding you through the conversation this evening. You have contributors to this wonderful publication. Please join me in welcoming Kathy Spiller and our guests this evening for this wonderful event.
Thank you, Claire, and thank all of you for coming out this evening. We're going to have a wonderful conversation. We've brought together just some leading lights in feminism, all three of them local. I'm the outsider here, but all three have contributed and written for Ms. And as I said, they're here locally, and so accessible to you in other ways as well. As Claire said, the book, 50 Years of Ms., it's the best of the pathfinding magazine that ignited a revolution. Very proud, the New York Times calls it the illustrated guide to dismantling the patriarchy. That was the best thing they said about it. No, we've gotten great reviews, and we're just thrilled. This is one of about 36 events that we have held across the country since the book was published mid-September. Each event has been very different. The purpose of these events, in addition to selling the books and meeting with people who are part of the Ms. community, is to engage in conversation about what we've learned from the 50 years, but more critically, what are we going to do in this period to move forward? We're in a terrible period of backlash in this country as well as around the world. And we need the best ideas, the best strategies of the past 50 years, but we also need the best ideas of today. And so that's what these conversations have been about. Many of you have read Ms. probably, maybe a show of hands since it was first out. So some of you have been reading Ms. for a long time. Some of you are relatively new to it. You know this much, that it's been a real touchstone for the feminist movement for all of its 50 years. It was the first to break stories on abortion in 1972 before the Roe v. Wade decision with a petition signed by 53 famous women that they had had abortions. The Washington Post actually a couple of years ago said that petition had changed the course of the reproductive rights movement because it had made visible those people who had benefited from abortion, who had been invisible in the fight. It was the first to put sexual harassment on the cover. It was the first to put black women feminists, black feminists on the cover. It was the first to put a battered woman's face on the cover and to define the term femicide. So it's been a real trendsetter, and it still to this day is. If you don't get Ms., I hope that you will get a bookmark that we brought with us. Hopefully you got those, good. It has a QR code. If you follow the QR code to the website, you can sign up for the first year free. It's on us. You can also use it repeatedly to purchase for free gifts for your family and friends. So I hope you'll help us expand the reach of Ms. So that it stays very vital. We also have a vital website. We now are podcasting through Ms. Studios. We have e-newsletters. You can get a daily or a weekly e-newsletter, whatever you want. But we do want you to be part of this Ms. community ongoing. So if you're not signed up, please do so before the evening is out. So with that, I would like to get started by first introducing the panelists who have joined me here today to begin this conversation. Stephanie Dunn, to my immediate left. Stephanie is a writer, filmmaker, cultural critic, and Ms. contributor with a specialization in gender and race. She co-founded and chairs the Morehouse Cinema, Television, and Emerging Media Studies Department. Welcome. Thanks for joining us tonight. To her left, Pat Mitchell. Pat is an award-winning journalist, producer, and media executive. She is co-founder, host, and curator of TED Women, co-founder and managing partner of Connected Women Leaders, and author of Becoming a Dangerous Woman, Embracing Risk to Change the World. Pat, thanks for joining us. And Stacy Keltner, another Ms. contributor and member of the Ms. Committee of Scholars, the current chair of Kennesaw State University's Radow College's, did I pronounce that correctly, Interdisciplinary Studies Department. She also is the former president of the Association for the Study of Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies in the South, and she started the Women's Studies and Gender Studies program at Kennesaw State. So my first question tonight is to all three of you. It's the same question. If you can remember the first time you read Ms. Magazine, or how you discovered Ms. Magazine, and what it's meant to you as a feminist. So, Stephanie?
Okay,
put you right on the spot.
I will just start. Hello, everyone. How are you? So glad you're here with us. So I knew you were going to ask that question, and all day I was like, when was the first time I ever held a Ms. Magazine in my hand? And it's strange because it's one of those publications that I can't remember not having around in this weird way. And I don't want to say I was reading it at like 3 because I wasn't really. It's about thereabouts when it came out. But I just remember being in college, and I was surprised because I hadn't really been introduced to Ms. before that. I really hadn't. And that struck me as interesting because that meant in high school, you know, it wasn't a magazine that was there for us, which it should be. It's sort of like a required reading. It really should be required reading, but it's not, and it wasn't then. And of course, now it would be banned, and is, because
That's right.
you know, it is way too hot to handle and always has been. So so the moment that I mark is in college and reading Bell Hooks. It was all that period of discovery in English class. But I will say that the high point for me was getting Ms. Magazine in the mail, and I'm getting all emotional even thinking about it, because I published my first book, which is called, aptly titled, I think, fit for Ms. Magazine, Bad Bitches and Sassy Supermamas, Black Power Action Films. And Ms. invited me, was like, oh, do you want to write? So I was like, for Ms. Magazine? Are you serious? Yes, anything. A line, a sentence. They were like a whole article. I just couldn't get over it that I would be in the Ms. Magazine. So I just will never forget getting the advance copy. It was fall, it was 2008, and I swear, you would have thought I had won the lottery, that it was my actual book. I was so just holding it in my hand, and even now I just get the chills, because it was just like, this is Ms. Magazine, and I had used this magazine so much in my research, even for my book. I mean, articles by Jamaica Kincaid, I mean, about Pam Grier. I mean, I had been all over the archives of Ms., and here I was now part of the archives.
Well, I'm going to ask you about that article in just a little bit. Pat, do you remember?
Well, what a great pleasure it is to be here, and thank you for convening this great community of feminists and the men who love us and support us. I, like Stephanie, cannot remember a time when Ms. wasn't in my life, but since I'm 80, I know that that didn't happen until I was 30. Is that possible? It doesn't seem possible that I was already 30 when that's the right date,
possible.
right?
Yeah.
Well, what I do remember, I'm not actually.
Yeah, we're like, stop. Where's
No,
that
I'm
thing?
actually not. The calendar says I am, but I am absolutely convinced I am not. I don't know what happened there, but, because I do believe activism is the antidote to aging,
Yes.
by the way. Which is why I'm still here and still active and an activist. But my activism had started before Ms., because being a woman growing up in the South and teaching at the University of Georgia, I love that I'm between the two academics here who gratefully are still there doing the good work. But I was teaching and trying to support a son as a divorced mother and working on my PhD, and suddenly there was a magazine in my life that had me on the cover. Well, it wasn't actually me, but it was a woman with all those multiple arms doing thousands of different chores. That was the first cover, right?
Yes.
And I looked at that and said, that's me, that's my life, out there trying to balance 1,000 different things, doing everything all at once, having everything all at once, and I knew that I had found a sisterhood. And that sisterhood feeling was so strong and powerful that I actually left teaching, moved to New York to become a journalist, and applied for a job at Ms., which I didn't get.
I had nothing to do with that.
I only share that story because this was the early 70s, and the doors were opening for women and people of color just a little bit to come in the door and apply for jobs because of the Equal Opportunity Employment Act, which was really a sort of system of quotas in this country. Yes, we had quotas at one time, and we need to have them again, by the way, to ensure that our progress continue toward something closer to equality. But because of that, I was knocking on a lot of doors. I'd been encouraged to do that by what I was reading. I don't remember why I didn't get the job at Ms., but I do remember why I didn't get the job at Cosmopolitan. Well, Helen Gurley Brown interviewed me, and if any of you ever had the chance to meet her, what an extraordinary woman. She really was a force. But she looked at me and she said, honey, you are never going to be a Cosmopolitan girl. And she was absolutely right, by the way. I'm happy to say she's right. But imagine coming full circle to today when I opened my inbox, and one of the first things I always go to read is my Ms. Daily newsletter, because that reconnects me to everything really that matters in the world and that defines my path from that first Ms. to this Ms. today. And the excitement and thrill of seeing my name as one of the contributors to an article on a very important subject that I'm sure we'll come back to, the efforts of women all over the world to find peace and justice, which is a struggle that we continue to do today, but thanks to Ms., we do it with the global sisterhood. So, thank
Thanks,
you, Kathy.
Thank you. Thank you. Stacy.
Thank you so much for having me on this panel. I'm a little starstruck. Like both Pat and Stephanie said, I don't remember a time when there wasn't Ms., and it kind of has this vintagey tint to it. Like if I think back to the first time, it was always there. And I grew up in the South. I grew up in traditional Southern context. And it was always there, and it was always there as a questioning of identity. And I remember being in elementary school and thinking, well, why is it Miss or Mrs.? Why isn't it Ms.? Isn't it supposed to be Ms.? And it was all because it was just in the milieu. It was there in the culture, kind of had always been there. And I think one of the reasons I may have been so attracted to it is because it was taboo, right? It was dangerous, it was liberating, freeing, and it was never around, it wasn't at your doctor's office, it wasn't at anywhere you went, it was sort of absent, but it was still there in the culture, always. And then when I got to high school and I could drive and I could start doing things on my own, I just started collecting all the progressive magazines I could find, right? And so Ms. was certainly one of those. So those were my first experiences of the magazine.
Thank you. So in putting together the book and going through 50 years of this publication, which is extraordinary. By the way, the Feminist Majority Foundation now publishes Ms. We've had it since 2002 when Steinem asked if we would take it on. And it took us a while to say yes because we didn't know anything about publishing magazines. But when she said, if you don't, we're closing for the last time. Because it had survived 4 commercial publishers that had almost killed it off. She had put together a group of women investors in the late 90s. They had purchased it back from the last commercial publisher and tried to make a go of it at the very time that the magazine industry was going through a tremendous change. They were quickly running out of money and came to us and we said, surely there's another group that can do this. And she said, actually, no, nobody wants it. But we understood the importance of the magazine as a go-to resource for the movement and as a way to connect feminists all over the country and all over the world. Ms. has always been a global part of the global movement. It's always reported on global women's movements and issues. But in the age of the internet, it really could expand. So we did say yes, but in putting together the book and going through the 50 years, what was very clear to me as a key lesson coming out of the 50 years is that progress and change only happened because it was an organized effort. It didn't just happen. People didn't just, as Joanne Edgar, one of the original editors, thought in the very beginning, well, if we'll just explain the problem, surely it will correct itself. She really thought that. But it's very clear that any progress has been organized. It's also clear that to sustain the progress, the organizing has to keep going. And so I'm curious from each of you, what do you think is a key lesson of the last 50 years of this movement? And that should help us figure out a way forward. Does anyone want to go first on that?
I will.
Okay.
I believe that for any movement to succeed, women have to be in leadership. Because we know, and that's not to say women only, because we can't do it alone, and we're not asking to do it alone, but there's a lot of evidence in every aspect of our lives that when women lead, change happens. Action follows. And that's often out of an imperative, of simply having to do it because there was no one else to do it. And it takes more than one of us. It takes a movement. And Ms. was the momentum that kept the women's movement moving forward. And when I look around the world today at the movements that are significantly changing lives, culture, minds, opinions, you'll often find that a woman is leading it. I am particularly involved with women leading the climate movement, the climate justice movement. If we are going to solve the problem of ensuring a habitable planet for every one of us and our children and grandchildren, it's going to be women who lead us there. It's not going to be scientists. We have to have their data. It's going to be women on the ground, on the front lines. And every week or every day when I look at Ms., I am inspired to continue that work as a woman leader on whatever front line I may be, because I see the stories of women leading change all over the world. And again, we're not doing it to the exclusion of men. We're just saying that women in leadership bring a particular kind of commitment to action, which, as I said, often comes from an imperative. And Ms. documents that action for us, those stories that succeed through movements, through campaigns, through the kind of changes that are hard to get. Look at how hard it is even now, how much pushback there is on the rights that we fought so hard. I cannot believe that I'm sitting in this state fighting for the right to reproductive health. I cannot believe that. I spent my whole college years and all the years following fighting for that right. And now we're fighting for it again so that my grandchildren can make their own choices about when and if they want to have children and a healthy reproductive life. So we have to remain vigilant, and we have to remain in a leadership position. And I don't mean by leadership elected to leadership. That's good. We need more and more women there. But leading from wherever we are. Gloria always says the best thing. Gloria says, start to lead from where we stand. Wherever that is. In our home, in our family, in our neighborhood, at our school board, wherever it is, lead forward toward the changes that we know are essential.
Thank you. And that's a message that we've always tried to keep in Ms. Absolutely.
So I like to think that a magazine as impactful as Ms. has as much to teach us in its hits as it does its misses. So I think one of the powers of Ms. Magazine at its best when there was a coalition of women from different ethnic, religious, class backgrounds. I think one of the things that we are probably missing, if we want to use the word contemporary feminist movement, is that I am not sure that the coalition building is there like it should be. So the black rights, the black liberation or civil rights movement should be linked to the movement for women's reproductive rights, our fight against gender and sexual discrimination. There needs to be a coalition that understands that it's human rights that's under attack. And I think that Ms., it shouldn't be, but there's a way in which it might be sort of in the popular imagination still sort of associated with a sort of white, middle-class, feminist sort of now vintagey thing, right? When it really does remain as contemporary as it's incredible, right? It's so important right now because the denial of the right to choose impacts poor women, Latinx women, black women, right? I mean, Jewish women. It impacts all of us, right? Whether or not we have choice. But I think the answer, the strategy is absolutely in the coalition building, much more visibly and forcibly. Because I think Ms. can become a silo. It can be sort of, the people who represent Ms. Magazine are, right, these women, and it has nothing to do with me. I've heard people say this, right, as I've tried to discuss with them the relevance of feminism now. So there is a disconnect, right? So Ms. has that work to do, because it's never been more important to have a Ms. Magazine, but I think represented by a coalition of forces. And that's really, I think, when Ms. was at its best. I mean, the covers that I remember and I love are, it's Shirley Chisholm and it's Gloria Steinman. It's, right, Dorothy Pitman Hughes. It's that the power of that unity.
Well, in fact, Ms. went against all the advice of the publishing industry to put black women on the cover. It's some of its earliest magazines, and much of the newsstand industry of the South refused to carry the magazine as a result. I think that from its very beginning, it has been committed to an intersectional analysis of the problems that we face, and has had many of the scholars, the Kimberly Crenshaws, the others who have, at Bell Hooks, who have written for the magazine, have been featured in the magazine. And we have a committee of scholars to this day that's a majority women of color who guides a lot of the work that is in the magazine.
Janelle Hobson in the light.
Say again?
Janelle Hobson in the light.
Janelle, one of our most prolific writers, Aviva Davibon. Her mother was first published in Ms. So Beverly Guy Sheftall. So there's been a real conscious effort, but I agree with you, the perception's not always there.
Because I think it's on the street. That's what
it's
on the street.
Yeah.
Theoretically, we're together, but on the street, in the connection.
But this of course, is the oldest strategy in the world.
Yeah.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
This is why the patriarchy stays in power.
Right.
Keep the women divided into silos and opposing each other. The coalition, you mentioned, Stephanie, is our only hope.
That's right.
It's the only hope to surviving as a planet, because we must bring all of our efforts together. And it's our only hope for not only reclaiming but sustaining the rights that we have as human beings, all human beings. And all of our issues are certainly intersectional.
Stacy, do you want to?
Yeah, I would add to that. I was going to say that I think connection is the most important lesson. And personally, from my own personal experience, I'm here in Georgia. I teach out at Kennesaw State University. There's a lot of conservative activists who come out and end up on our campus. We have men's rights activists. We have anti-black racist activists. Lots of people in my department have been targeted and doxxed. And we don't have the support of the institution, and it's very isolating. It's very alienating when those sorts of things happen. But like Pat was saying, you have to start to lead, and then you have to reach out beyond the silo and get out. So personally, when I was experiencing some of this myself, I couldn't get the administration to respond. I couldn't get a statement to respond. I was told to just, put my head down and wait it out. That was sort of the strategy. That was not my strategy. I was not happy with that at all. I was not going to do that. So I reached out to WGS South. It used to be called Southeastern Women's Studies Association. It turns 50 in 2026. We're bringing it back to Atlanta, so just so you know. It's the oldest academic women's and gender studies program still active, which is exciting. It was one of the original founders of the National Women's Studies Association. And I reached out to Ms. in the Classroom, Karen Jolna, and started working with both in 2017 because I realized we just needed a bigger network to respond. So if you have a larger network and you just get bigger and you bring these, forces onto campus, then all of a sudden you do have a voice. So that was sort of my way of responding, and the way I've sort of thought of the impact of organizations like Ms. and WGS South.
Well, in fact, out of that, you attended one of our Scholars Writers workshops. And Ms. has, since we took it on, have made a very conscious program to reach out to feminist scholars all across the country, and to provide training in how to write for popular media. Because, writing for an academic journal is fine, but the 5 people who read it, that's the extent of your reach. But if you learn to convert those ideas and how to write for popular media like Ms. or any other popular media, your ideas can reach a much larger audience. And so that's how you started writing for Ms. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, certainly. So the first, we had a conference in 2017, and we reached out to Ms. to become a sponsor and to join us and set up a table. We bought a button machine. We got lots of Ms. magazines. People made all kinds of Ms. buttons to wear around. It was really nice. And then a year or two later, I started the presidential cycle, which is a 6-year cycle, and I did not think through that. But it's 2 years president-elect, 2 years president during a pandemic, and then 2 years past president. And so one thing that I did was start bringing Ms. to just do panels at the conference. So they would do just a panel on writing and have people. But then we were able to host a pre-conference, and Ms. offered a 6-week workshop, which was amazing. And within, when it sort of concluded the first day of the conference, we had 5 people published in Ms. within 2 weeks, which is really very exciting. And so working with Karen through this, and I've been wanting to transition to more public writing. I was invited to join the Committee of Scholars, which is very exciting, and got to meet with the group in November for the first time. Yeah.
Well, it's really important right now, too, because Black studies, women and gender studies, multicultural studies are under severe attack, and not just in Florida, but here in Georgia. And it could not be more important right now that some of these ideas are making it onto the pages of popular media. Stephanie, any perspective?
I have the privilege of, and I guess in some ways it's a safe space in terms of race, because I teach at Morehouse College, which, as you know, is part of the Atlanta University Center, which is where, of course, the likes of Dr. King and the Spike Lees and Sam Jacksons and, David O. Satcher and lots of folks were educated. So there's a way in which these discussions of banning, of race, of all these things that are going on, we can have constant conversation without sort of checks, right? And Morehouse has always had a diversity of people who came during, the sort of the communist hunt. We had people like Paul Robeson at a time when they were persona non grata. That's in the history of Morehouse to have that. Of course, the struggle with gender, that's a little bit different, patriarchy. And so I'm sitting here now going, okay, maybe I can bring that to Morehouse, because, they expect me to shake things up because I'm usually the person in the room going, but what about gender? And so, because often when you're at then sort of a male institution, they think that gender is a synonym for talking about men's issues, whatever that means, in some kind of vacuum that has nothing to do with women's oppression or anything like that. So that's always a barrier. But right now, with the attacks on banning books, one of the things that I feel that Ms. just sort of is a defiant, shoe and slap in the face of this nonsense, is this banning of books in K through 12 is, and then of course it's reaching into college, if you state college. This is an extraordinarily important battle that we've got to be involved in institutionally and with our words on paper. We have to marshal all forces, because literally there really can be a generation of young women and men growing up who have never heard of Ms., who don't know what that is. They don't even know it's a resource in terms of their research. Literally, that is what we are facing. And so I'm really concerned about, like, how do we take Ms., how do we take this book, how do we take, all that Ms. has been, and we sort of fight this on the K through 12 level. I don't have all the answers to these questions, but it's critically important that we're on the front lines of it.
Very much so. Get your local public libraries to buy a book. That's one thing you can do, or if you're at a college or university, insisting that they carry the book. I think that's just very, very important. Pat, looking for what we've got to do to keep moving forward, and certainly women in leadership is a key part of that. But is there anything else that you think is critically important that this movement must focus on to get us out of this period of rising authoritarianism and the oppression and backlash to women's equality?
How long do I have to answer that question? No, actually, I think the answer is rather simple. And it's one that's been with us from the beginning of time. And it's one that Ms. Exemplifies in every way. And that is that we, as a people, learn, as human beings, learn from sharing our own stories, our own experiences. And women in particular are good at that because we've, again, had to be throughout time, coming together to share how we survive through a winter storm, or how we carry on the many things that the responsibilities we have to do. So number one, we share our stories, our learning, our experiences. Connection. We have to stay connected to each other, and that means across the silos of geography, the silos of generation, of race, of background, of education, all the ways in which we divide ourselves up into the silos in which we work. We have to bridge these gaps if we're ever going to be a collective force for change. Third thing is community. You have to feel that you're not alone, that there's someone in your community. And one of the great things that I've felt about coming back to Atlanta is something that I felt when I came here in the early 90s through the work of women feminist leaders like Stephanie Davis and others who adopted me immediately into the community. You've got that feeling of someone's got your back. And right now, writers are on the line feeling no one's got their back, particularly writers who are writing about critical race theory, like our friend Kimberly Crenshaw and others. They're being erased, and you're being threatened in the place where you work and for your work. So we have to be community. We have to stand up for each other. And all of that, if we connect, if we share, if we trust, and then we show up for each other. Speaking up more bravely and courageously, but more importantly, standing up and showing up for each other. If we do that, we're unstoppable. If we did that at the election, at the ballot boxes, we'd have a woman president right now. There's no question about it. And we would have a stronger democracy. And I'm not just saying that because I'm a woman and obviously believe in the strength of women, but there is data that proves this. Women leaders come into leadership if we are fully realizing our power, and we can, in fact, lead to the kind of changes that are important. But we can't do it without trust. We can't do it without connection. We can't do it without community.
Which Ms. tries to do all three. We're a trusted source of information. We share ideas, which is the strength of this movement, is its ideas. It's the only real asset it has at the end of the day, and the community and that's why we call it the Ms. community. You become a member of the Ms. community, not a subscriber, but you get the magazine as a member of the Ms. community. So we're trying to embody those ideals. A critical thing we got to do moving forward, Stacey, to get us back on the path towards equality.
I think in addition to sharing stories, we need to make sure they're heard. It's a big issue. I was just thinking about the banned book. You know, we have National Banned Book Weeks, and so we did this, a lot of campaigning, around our campus at that time. And I was surprised at how few students knew of all of the classic books that had been banned. So we had a cart, we brought them around, we showed, did you know this book was banned? Did you know this book was banned at this time and that time? And so they just didn't know. And we had buttons that said, bans off our bodies, books, and ballots, so that we could extend the issue, so that they would understand that, well, the reason we're losing is because of redistricting, because there's minoritarian rule, and to connect all of these issues so that they understand. One of the things I feel like people don't really know about in Georgia right now is the attack on higher ed in Georgia. Like, we know about the book bannings in K through 12, but not many people are really talking about the way our Board of Regents, which governs the university system of Georgia, has essentially tried to turn the university system into Florida overnight. And so we have all of these. Right now we have all of these problems and mandates to comply. And one of the ways it did this was by weaponizing our own language. So they really drew on the AAUP, is the American Association of University Professors. They drew on the language of academic freedom and made it stronger in the BOR policy and handbook. But then they added a line that said no one would be required to take an oath of loyalty, except the oath of loyalty to Georgia. So that one's included there. But their only example of this was diversity statements in the hiring process. And so it was this little clause that all of a sudden required us to look at all of our public-facing documents, our mission statements, our vision statements, our diversity statements in our syllabi, in our faculty handbook. All of that's being taken away. And this is the only example that we have, is diversity. So our department in particular is a little worried, because I'm chair of interdisciplinary studies, and we house everything that ends with studies. that is social justice oriented. So we've got gender studies, Black studies, peace and justice studies. All of the studies are there with us. So we've been particularly concerned about having to take down our mission statement. How are we going to rewrite these for compliance? And we have a legal team that's very concerned about us being out of compliance. But there's no real discussion about, well, why is that use of the term diversity here being attacked? It seems philosophical to me, or it seems pedagogical. We can't have any of those discussions now because diversity has become this kind of key word. But they've been able to erase diversity by drawing on academic freedom. It's amazing. And so it's not something that's really being talked about at all, but that is happening on university campuses.
And so we've got to fight that
yes.
because it's impacting the kind of information that we can even share in college classrooms. Stephanie, quickly, because we got to take some questions. A key thing we've got to do to move forward.
So I think, in addition to, of course, all of the well-stated wisdom of my fellow panelists, that it's important to be involved with organized movement. So I know, there are, sometimes it's great that we individually gonna buy Ms., gonna subscribe to, gonna do the thing, gift the thing to somebody for the holidays, all of those good things. But I think now we really have to individually also choose to align with organizations who are doing the work, and we might not consider ourselves individually as organization people, right, so to speak. But I think this is not the time to be sort of in a silo ourselves. We really need to reach across and be uncomfortable, right, and be involved with movements and organizations that we might not typically align ourselves with in terms of going to their meetings. I think this is really critically important, that we look at what feminist groups, what groups are fighting, rights in terms of whether that's racially or class or gender. We really need to get our list together and see who's out here doing the work.
Yep.
And why am I not out here doing the work, with these folk who are doing this work? Because that's how we build that coalition and that make that collective voice more visible, right? Rather than sort of, we need organizations, locally and nationally to partner together. They need to partner together. No, right? If we are anti-discrimination, then we've got to be anti-discrimination, not in a silo. Right? So black people over here, and the Jewish people over here, and women are, no. We have got to bring these coalitions together to fight this onslaught.
Organized effort. It's the only way forward. I want to add something to it, but I'll wait until give some of you a chance to ask a question. There's no mic or anything, I'm told, but you could just stand up and
shout it out.
We can hear you, and I'll repeat the question. Raise your hand. Okay. Stephanie, repeat the question.
So her question was, how do we know which organizations really to align ourselves with? Because of course we want to be aligned with ethical, really truly activist, oriented, right, organizations. Did I paraphrase it all right? Is that okay? Right. And I think that's a great question. And being a professor, the first word out of my mouth is the research.
Yeah.
Right. Research is critically important, and we live in this era now where we can literally do this from our homes. We can, because there's going to be, on the people doing the work, they are going to be in the news, there's going to be newspaper articles, they're going to have a website, you're going to be able to look up the individuals associated with the organizations. So the research is critically important, I think. I think that's number one, and probably you never join up, right, without doing the work on the individuals associated, as well as what's the track record here, right? What is their agenda? What's the mission? What kind of activities have they been planning around the city? I take my son out, he's 14 years old, to different things after I do the research and discover, because I want him to understand it, not just sort of theoretically, or we're watching it on CNN all the time, go that's a shame, this is horrible, right? I'm like, no, we're gonna go out and, sometimes we have our signs and the whole thing, but, we joined with a couple of organizations. I have him doing research. He's almost a better researcher than me, because I've taught him, before you come with an argument or you wanna join up with something, you need to do all of the research.
And there's a lot of groups doing terrific work, grassroots organizing work, and in this area, in Georgia especially, on voting rights, on reproductive health and rights.
Get a long
There's
list.
a lot of great groups.
One thing
I'm sorry.
if I could just add
Yes.
something to that quickly, I think in addition to that kind of research, researching sort of the content of movements, and I think if you look at the reproductive justice movement, for example, it pulls together, it does that coalition work because it re-articulates reproductive rights in a social justice framework. So it addresses the environment, it addresses racial justice, it addresses ableism. And so that's one movement, in the history of the movement, and the way that work is done would be a good starting place.
I just think we can't afford to sit on the sidelines.
No.
And as women, we have often thought, well, I don't know enough about it. I'm not enough of an expert to get involved or to get engaged. And that holds us back. That held me back from becoming a leader in the climate movement, saying, I don't know anything about climate. My issues are gender and race related. That's where I'll do my work. So getting past that, and then finding the community and the organizations that align with what your goals and passions are, and just getting engaged, getting involved. None of us in this time can afford to be on the sidelines.
Exactly right.
Let me add really quickly too. Use the institutions. Go to the institutions that are here that also are higher education. We know we need to reach those generations of folk, right? But there's a list of activities. So when she's having something at Kennesaw State, you want to know about that, right? You want to go to the pages, and the same at Morehouse. There are not events that just happen for the black people in Atlanta. a few years ago, we had Norman Lear, had a whole evening with Norman Lear. A whole evening. I had everybody there, from Ken Fields to Marla Gibbs to Usher. It was a whole bunch of people, right? And then when I was asked by the Jewish Film Society to do something with them in terms of film, and they were like, Norman Lear was on your campus, and then they were showing like the documentary. I was like, you could have came over and had a conversation with him yourself. was on our campus all day.
You had a question.
In addition to joining organizations, I think that we also have to think about voting, because it's the governor who appoints the Board of Regents that's reporting back to that's following the governor's directives. It's local school boards who are elected by voters who are banning books. So I think that if you're looking for organizations, there's Black Voters Matter, there are indivisible groups, there are lots of good organizations out there that are organizing voters. And I think that in addition to the organizational work, which is extremely important, the voting work is important, and voting rights protection is important.
Exactly. I can
Perhaps
sum
the
it up
most
in
important
one
thing.
word: vote. She was
vote.
talking about voting and voting rights, which have been under attack here in Georgia and much of the South. I want to add one more thing that people can do, and I think it's very critical. And then I know we're about to end this portion of the evening. The Equal Rights Amendment. For those of you who read Ms., you know that it has been ratified. The Equal Rights Amendment has met the only two requirements set out in the Constitution for adding an amendment to the Constitution. You have to get a supermajority vote in the United States Congress, a 2/3 vote. That happened in 1972. It's been 50 years
With
since-
Rosalind Carter's
Yes,
endorsement.
yes. It's so it was a bipartisan vote, obviously. So it passed that threshold. Then it goes out to the state legislatures, and the state legislatures can vote either to affirm or not to affirm an amendment. The Constitution requires that 3/4 of the states have to vote to affirm the amendment. That happened in 2020 when Virginia, after a struggle to change the composition of the state legislature there and get a lot more women elected and a lot more Black women elected, voted to affirm the Equal Rights Amendment. That made it the 38th state to affirm. That's all we needed, 3/4 of the states. But on the way to being published in the Constitution as the 28th Amendment, the Trump Justice Department intervened. They are arguing that in the preamble of the Equal Rights Amendment, there was a time limit that Congress suggested should be met by the states. It was a 7-year time limit that Congress changed its mind a little bit later and extended that time limit another 2.5 years. But the last 3 states to ratify was after that time limit had been extended. But the time limit is in the preamble. It's not in the Equal Rights Amendment language that will be added to the Constitution that states were voting on. So the amendment has been ratified. Our way around this now is to get Congress, as it did with the 14th Amendment, have to put through a resolution in both houses of Congress to affirm that the Equal Rights Amendment has been ratified and is the 28th Amendment to the Constitution. So that is the fight we were in right now. We need a simple majority vote in both houses. In both the Senate and the House, it requires only a simple majority vote. So we are fighting member by member in the House. You've got a lot of work to do here in Georgia. There is bipartisan support. In the Senate, we have 53 votes in the Senate. It got hung up in the filibuster rule, but if we can get through this next election, retake the House, hold the Senate, we can go back with a resolution through the House, move it over to the Senate, and with enough pressure on senators, and it's going to take a lot of pressure, they can declare that the resolution is they call it a privileged motion that is exempt from the filibuster, because it's the only way we're going to get it through the Senate. And I do predict that once it's on the floor of the Senate, suddenly there's going to be some converts, because they don't want to go down in history. In fact, when it was before the Senate earlier this year, not a single Republican senator spoke against it. They just quietly voted against it, except for Murkowski and Collins. So we must get the Equal Rights Amendment in the Constitution. It is critical to give us a legal strategy for recovering abortion rights nationwide. And don't think for a minute that we're through with this fight in any way, because if we get the wrong composition at the national level, they will ban abortion nationwide. And there's several different ways they can do that. Even in a state like California, where we have a constitutional protection, that will go away under a national ban. It's the only way we can get stronger laws to stop violence against women. So we have got to get the Equal Rights Amendment in the Constitution so that we have a stronger legal base to which to fight forward. So I want to encourage all of you to help us get to these members of Congress, start lobbying them. But also you can go to signforera.org, SING, Roman numeral 4, ERA.org. It's a there's like 300 organizations that are pushing this petition. We want to show that millions of people, it's got a 70% plus popularity among people, both women and men and Republicans. So we've just got to get this business finished so that we can move on in a much stronger position. So
I'm so glad you brought this up, Kathy, because there's so much misinformation talking about not getting the right information.
Right.
So many ways in which women and men have been divided on this issue by saying it's not necessary. We have equal rights in this country anyway. No, we don't. As women, we do not have equal rights. And we're one of the few places that doesn't have it in their constitution, one of the few countries. So thank you for explaining.
And if it doesn't make any difference, then what's the
big deal? Right, right.
So I think we've run out of time this evening. Do we have time for one more question? One more question. Yes. Does each of you want to make a remark? How do you keep sustaining the work?
Well, I think I said at the beginning that activism is the antidote to aging. And I really believe that. I wake up every morning and with purpose and passion. And if I didn't have that, I can't imagine how life would be worth living, really. So it's believing that I can make a difference in some relationship, some organization, something I do during the day, something I say. I think it's that essential belief in knowing that every voice matters, every vote counts. I mean, it's, as corny as all that sounds, I really buy into that. I love Marlo Thomas used to say, and I think it was published in Ms., that one of us is a pest, two of us is a coalition, three of us is a movement. So I wake up every day wanting to be that pest, wanting to be the nuisance, and that truly, that's somewhat facetiously, but wanting to be constantly challenging myself to look at all that needs to be done and try and find some way to be a part of it.
Otherwise, it's not going to get done. Stacy.
This is a question near and dear to my own heart as well. And I got the chance to ask Stacey Abrams this. She was the keynote speaker for the WGS South annual conference a couple years ago during the pandemic. And her answer, which I loved, she said, I allow myself to feel joy and I allow myself to feel pain, right? It was sort of the feeling. I allow myself to have these feelings. And that joy, I would add joy, pain, but I would also add connection. Because in movement building, it's actually the connection with the people that you're working with that makes it worth it too. And I remember, during the pandemic, we had a lot of restructuring in our college, and we had a lot of issues going on. Despite the pandemic, things did not shut down. The fight did not shut down. But when we'd get on Zoom, like the first thing, my colleagues and I, we would sort of see each other and just say, "Oh my God," and laugh. And it's just that laughter at how ridiculous the world is, but you still find joy with each other. That sort of experience of connection is what makes it worth it.
Stephanie.
Yeah, and that's a great question. And I think that my personal life, my personal family history certainly plays into it. My mom did not get to go to college, and she actually grew up picking cotton until she left the South when she was 17. And then when she got to Chicago, she was raped, and I'm a child of rape. But she is this very deeply optimistic, deeply prayerful, spiritual woman. And even in her disadvantages, when she was a factory worker for $5 an hour when I was growing up, and she didn't have, a PhD and all of that, but on her job, when wrong was being done to other workers, like for example, they were harassing a woman who needed extra time in the bathroom, my mom was always the one to challenge it. Now, she needed her 75 an hour job. But she would say, to them, that this is just wrong. And now for her, she was speaking out of her religious, spiritual, and she would say, I serve a higher power than you. And you will not harass this woman, right, because she needs it. She would stand up for the people in that office. To me, it's just really amazing because I know she needed her job. And she also, when they would try to make them work overtime, when she started the job, and she'd been there 15 years, and they would go, you have to work overtime because we need you on Sunday. And my mom, I told you I do not work on Sunday. The Lord took Sunday off, and so, but, right? To this day, she in this deeply church, the Pentecostal Church of God in Christ, deeply patriarchal, my mom is a woman who challenges to this day this notion that as a woman, she shouldn't teach and preach. So I don't really have a choice in my uber privileged, coming from women who picked cotton, but who were like, we make something out of, right, to give up. But I also work around young people, including young men, and so I'm reminded of the need every day. And raising a 14-year-old son who I'm just finding out he doesn't understand feminism. When my own son, who lives with someone like me, said to me the other day, I said, well, what do you think a feminist is? And he said to me, well, I don't agree with some of them, like you guys believe in abortion and something he said. I said, oh, no, he's got so much reading he's doing right now and watching.
So he couldn't make it tonight.
No.
Oh, yeah.
No. Only because he had a home, but I'm telling you. So that, for me, it's that thing that reminds us that who are we to be giving up when the struggle of, we've been carried by all of these women associated with Ms. Magazine, right? And in our own lives. They've literally carried us. And sometimes you really do have to when you're tired, you really have to let your mind go there and go, there are less privileged women, right? Like Fannie Lou Hamer and all of these women. So less stuff than I had, who carried on this battle, and I know they were tired.
And a lot of women around the world depend on this movement in this country keeping going. I mean, the United States has a huge footprint in the foreign policy area on so many different levels. And if we backslide here, and we participate in international conferences, we're at the UN, Pat, I know you are, they will frequently tell us women who fled the Taliban now are still organizing with their sisters from Iran who are in the United States to resist the gender apartheid regimes in their home countries. They don't give up. And they keep saying without the US feminist movement, to give them support and sisterhood, they couldn't keep doing what they do. And so we have no choice, really. We really don't. The people in this room are connected enough to this movement and concerned enough to come out tonight. We have no choice but to keep fighting forward. Even if we never see the day of full equality, we have no choice but to keep working. So I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. Stacy, Pat, Stephanie, thank you.